Backhouse, you're British, right?
Yeah, last time I checked.
Yeah. Still got a queen over there?
Yep.
Have you ever blacked out, woken up somewhere, not knowing how you got there?
Not lately. Why? What have you got?
I don't have anything. I got nothing. I don't have anything. But I'll be watching you, Backhouse.
Today in Room 101, we go one-on-one with Elizabeth Kucinich, where she reveals all from meeting Dennis
I just knew I'd met my husband the first time I met him.
to war in the Middle East.
So-called Israel-Lebanon war, which really was a proxy war with the United States and Iran.
To the relationship between war and the environment.
Dennis and I see global warring and global warming as being very, very intimately connected.
As well as her own personal journey towards sustainability.
I didn't actually want to study international conflict analysis. I wanted to study sustainable development.
All that coming up on Room 101. Hi, I'm Sarah Backhouse and welcome to G Livings Room 101. We're joined today by Elizabeth Kucinich, wife of presidential hopeful Dennis Kucinich. Room 101 is a place that we can really delve into people's histories, talk about their issues, and we're very excited to have a young woman in here today. Elizabeth already has had quite a remarkable history. At 18, she traveled to Agra, India, and worked for Mother Teresa's charity. She recently spent 16 months in Tanzania, and she now found herself living in Cleveland, Ohio, and married to Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Elizabeth, so lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
What are your and Dennis's policies? What's the message that you want to convey to the American people?
Well, the primary message is you have a choice, and that there are people who are running in this campaign who really do stand for the world that we can all see is possible, primarily to the war in Iraq, when we understand that most young people really knew that it was wrong to go in. There was a leader in Congress who led an effort for the Democrats to vote no, who wrote an analysis in October 2002 that pulled apart the resolution to go to war and led the effort in Congress to vote against it. That was Dennis Kucinich, who's voted against going to war, voted 100% of the time not to fund the war, because we know every time you vote to fund the war, you reauthorize it. And also, as soon as the troops had a foot on the ground, had a plan to get them home, to really bring stabilization to that region. There is somebody who walks in their integrity, even when the media push and say, no, you're not patriotic, you're somebody who's treasonous towards our country because you're not standing for war. No, we stand for peace, because we know another world really is possible. And that's where I feel young people are. It's certainly where I am. When we look at the neoconservative doctrine of peace through strength, preemption, unilateralism, first strike, not participating with the world community, instead isolating them and ourselves, and working, as an individual power that refuses to negotiate. What has taken us into these illegal aggressions against the world, that has caused this nation to be less safe. And together with that, we've also got to stop the Congress from pushing through these awful benchmarks, which all the candidates and all of Congress are talking about. One of those benchmarks being the Hydrocarbon Act, which sounds like a great environmental policy, but what it is really is calling for Iraq to privatize its oil, and really our government forcing their hand to do that. 80% of their oil to be privatized into basically US-held oil interests. We see how, again, global warring and global warring are inextricably linked.
On to another contentious issue now, healthcare. Obviously, as a fellow Brit, we come from a background of, NHS in Britain, where the government looks after you. How have you adjusted to this American system? What's Dennis's policy?
I'm blown away coming to America, which is purported to be, the greatest nation in the world, the richest nation in the world, and then see that 47 million Americans do not have healthcare coverage at all. That most of 50% of the foreclosures and the bankruptcies that take place are because people can't pay their medical expenses. I don't understand. I really don't. Why do we not see leadership in government which is really for the people? I thought the government here was government of the people, by the people and for the people. It clearly isn't. And this is really, the direction that Dennis and I are trying to push the presidential campaign into. He is the only candidate for president who advocates a universal, single-payer, not-for-profit healthcare system, effectively Medicare for all. It's the policy that Michael Moore endorsed recently after producing his documentary Sicko, which people may have seen, which really highlights how health insurance companies make money not providing healthcare. If you have any other business, if you sell shoes, you make money selling shoes. If you sell cars, you make money selling cars. Health insurance companies make money not providing healthcare. Now, all the other candidates are for a system where they call universal, and I see this, I sit in all of the debates and I listen to them and just think, how can you talk about such life and death issues and try and manipulate people into thinking that they will have healthcare coverage, and then provide a policy which really has no caps on how much this system would cost? The other leading candidates all talking about keeping the for-profit system going, keeping insurance companies in control of healthcare, and just saying that the government will subsidize them more. So effectively making the taxpayers pay more money and still having to pay premiums, co-pays and deductibles on top of that. It doesn't make sense. A universal system of care, which is Medicare for all, is the only one that makes sense, and that's embodied in legislation 676.
I'm in total agreement. To me, still, I cannot get used to this system. The mind boggles that
it's so expensive. It's expensive for the consumer. It's expensive for the government, and
I know, wake up America. This health system, yeah, exactly. Hello, this healthcare system is not working. Let's talk about another issue now. The new economy that's more environmental, sustainable. What's Dennis's thoughts on that?
This is so exciting. We've held meetings in our congressional district prior to him announcing for his presidential candidacy, which really talking about how we can reinvigorate the economy, but on the next wave, having a restorative economy. I love Bill McDonough's work, Cradle to Cradle. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to bring into the administration, a Kucinich administration. And we see this embodied in something that we call a WGA, a Works Green Administration. It takes its inspiration from the Roosevelt's plan, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, where he spent money in creating millions and millions of jobs on conservation projects and other things during the Depression. Well, we're in a similar situation now where people need jobs, they need good paying jobs, but also we have a little bit of a thing going on called climate change, and we have to understand, toxicity within our environment and all the other different environmental impacts that our way of life is causing. And so a WGA, a Works Green Administration, is about using government as an engine for sustainability. It's so exciting. Imagine if we had all of these government departments and each department being its own engine for sustainability.
We'll be back here in Room 101 with Elizabeth Kucinich right after the break.
Dennis and I were in Israel, Palestine, Syria and Lebanon last year, immediately after the so-called Israel-Lebanon war, which really was a proxy war with the United States and Iran playing out in using the pawns of Lebanon and Israel. As soon as Israel started the heavy bombardment of South Lebanon, Dennis had a resolution, House Resolution 450, calling for the administration to actually use the opportunity of that conflict situation to bring about a wider reaching peace agreement.
How was that received?
That wasn't received at all. Unfortunately, what we have is an administration who doesn't want peace and stability in the Middle East. We have an administration that has a policy of divide and conquer. If we divide the Middle East, if we have instability there, then we get more of an opportunity to gain their oil wealth. Now, if we can keep them fighting against each other, then, we get what we want. And that's obviously not what is good for the American people. It's not what's good for the people in the Middle East or any of the countries there. We see, instead of America taking an even-handed approach and calling for people to come together, we saw the administration actually saying to Israel, continue longer than you want to. America actually pushed Israel to bombard Lebanon for a further 3 weeks after Israel actually wanted to withdraw. And we went down to South Lebanon. We went through all of these villages and towns that had been destroyed and spoke with the people and heard of the atrocities that had taken place. And in one area was just absolutely amazing. We went to Kana, which is the Cana of biblical law, where Jesus is said to have performed his first miracle. And we went there very late at night, but we'd heard that in recent weeks there'd been a bomb that had dropped on a building. The whole area had suffered heavy bombardment, but there'd been a bomb that had dropped on this one house where women and children had been crouching in the basement, dozens of them, thinking that this house was the safest house in the area because it was on the side of a hill. And unfortunately, a 1,000-pound bomb was dropped directly on top of the house. The women and children died. And the day before we arrived in Cana, an area had been cleared and paved over, and markers had been placed, rows and rows and rows of these markers showing photographs of all of the children and the women who died in that raid. And Dennis and I turned up. It was about, 8, 9 o'clock at night. It was pitch black. There was no electricity because all the power lines had been taken out. We shone the lights of our vehicle onto this graveyard, this makeshift graveyard, and then we just walked quietly up and down and paid our respects to the people who died. Well, by the time we got to the middle marker on the second row, we looked at this little boy who was about a year old or less, and Dennis just started to weep, just really feeling the enormity of what had happened. And an arm reached around his shoulder, and a man just comforted him, just stood there and comforted him. And Dennis regained his composure, as did I, and this gentleman just moved us on a couple of markers, and he pointed to a photograph of a lady and 3 children, and he said through an interpreter, "This was my family." And he'd reached out to Dennis, an American congressman, who they knew full well the role that America played in that. And he reached out with great humanity, seeing the expression of heart that Dennis had shown and just brought, and comforted him. And this gentleman then took us round up a little road, down a small alleyway, over a big mound of rubble, and it was pitch black, so we were all tripping over everything. And we stood in the crater of this bomb. One of the villagers brought round a vehicle round the back of the site so that we could see, what we were standing in. And very quickly news spread that an American congressman was in the area, and about 50 or 60 people gathered very tightly around us. And when we travel to the region, we don't inform the State Department because we know that they would limit our travel and do different things. And so we didn't come with a security detail. We just went there on our own with some friends who were interpreters. I'll never forget what happened. We were standing in this bomb crater, surrounded by all these people, and the first thing that we heard being called out from them was, "Tell the American people that we love them."
Wow.
Tell the American people that we know they don't know our story, and if they did, things would be different. They have complete faith in America. They believe in America. And we're taught here that these people are, terrorists and goodness knows what. The capacity of humanity, heart and compassion.
The ability to be able to
extraordinary.
forgive after, such horrible events.
They lost their families. We'd driven through, miles and miles and miles of South Lebanon, where their homes and their schools and cemeteries and plantations and fields and businesses and you name it, just completely destroyed. Millions of cluster bombs were dropped, and when we stepped over cluster bombs as we walked through these rubble that was left, stepped over landmines. I saw children playing next to landmines. It was incredibly, just so concerning, really, really dreadful that children are just in this situation. Then we returned there just a few weeks ago. We went back to South Lebanon, we went back to Syria too. And it was incredible because the first trip hadn't been announced. We'd just been there. We met certain people on the streets and talked and walked with them. And when we went back the second time, we met with some of the same people, and it was like meeting our friends again. We'd experienced such a moment of such devastation, but also such hope, that that really leads Dennis and I, gives us the strength to continue along this path, that if people truly want peace, we're willing to work for it.
That's an amazing story, and I think if people only realised, that by endorsing these candidates, they're giving money to these people that are paying for this warfare, which basically results in human death,
It does.
all for oil. I mean, I think there's such a disconnect with the actual physical events of what's going on the ground. And, by sharing a story like that, hopefully it'll make people think twice. But it's very moving.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now, what do you think, in this day and age, what do you think is the most pressing issue when it comes to the environment here in the US, for example?
Really, where America goes, the rest of the world follows. So we really see, Dennis and I see global warming and global warming as being very, very intimately connected. And so we see these fights over oil, the resource war that we're now in Iraq, for example, complete fabrication by the administration in order to go in, and we find it's all about oil. And when we see then the connection between oil and climate change and what that's doing to everybody around the world, I don't think there's one issue. We have to see the environment as being completely interconnected, and it's a whole system. When one thing goes out of balance, then everybody is affected and the whole planet's affected.
I'm interested also, you came into it from an interesting angle. You said you had done work with the American Monetary Institute, and that monetary policy was, very linked with the environment. Can you briefly describe that relationship?
Yeah, well, I was working for the Green Party when I first came across some of these economic issues, and we have a system at the moment where our money is actually debt. It's not money which is of value in itself. It's borrowed into circulation, and when you borrow money into existence, you then have to pay interest on it. And even though you're circulating that money to facilitate an economy, you're actually causing more and more debt, because the more time that money's circulating, the more interest you're paying. The interest goes up and up and up, exponential growth. Well, that then causes a driver that says we need to turn more natural resources into stuff and junk every single year just to keep up to speed with this ever-growing debt. Now, when you really look that you can have money which really is as we would expect money to be, just the stuff, which is a token that is used to exchange goods and services and link people with jobs and things like that, and really to help facilitate an economy in a positive way, we see that we need a completely different system where money is not debt, money is money. And when we do that, then we cut out the main driving force for us to have to keep turning more and more natural resources into junk.
You're watching Room 101. Now, I've outlined briefly some of the highlights in your life, but explain how a girl from Upminster, London, is now living in Cleveland, Ohio, and what happened along the way.
Quite a few things happened along the way in that journey. I really was brought up in a way that my mother always taught me, always turn a negative thought into a positive action. So from a very early age, I was very engaged in politics in the United Kingdom, going up and lobbying Parliament and doing all things while I was still at school. And I just knew that I really wanted to go to India. Bought my plane ticket, went on my own, and worked at the Missionaries of Charity home in Agra. And when I worked with the poor there, I really learned so much from them. I looked at it from a policy angle of what the governments were doing and monetary policy and things, and also looked at the effects of those kinds of policies on people and how people are really disenfranchised. And I really felt that I needed to come to America at some point, but I was only 18, and I managed to get to America finally when I was 28. So in the steps in between that, I studied religious studies and theology at the University of Kent at Canterbury. And then I did a master's degree in international conflict analysis. And the remarkable thing about that was I didn't actually want to study international conflict analysis. I wanted to study sustainable development so that I could go into businesses and really show them how they could conduct green business, sustainable business, and really start this new revolution that I see is really on the horizon to have a healthy economy. And I didn't get onto the program, so instead, I studied international conflict analysis after meeting a lecturer in a pub, and
as all good things happen in Britain. Yes,
all good things happen in Britain. And he enrolled me there and then. And the amazing thing was, I took my final exam in conflict resolution and world politics on September 11th, 2001.
There's been a number of coincidences in your life. Just to step back a bit, you grew up in Upminster, but it was a place called Dennis Lane. Am I right?
Yeah, it was 4 Dennis's cottages, Dennis's Lane.
Right. Okay. What is going on with this? There seems to be a lot of signs, would you say?
I think so. And then actually, my parents' home was in Upminster, but the last place that I lived when I was in the UK was in London proper, and on a road called Cleveland Road.
Ah.
So if you follow the roads, then it all leads to Dennis.
It certainly does indeed.
Yeah.
We've been speaking with Elizabeth Kucinich. After the break, we will find out how she met her husband, Dennis. All this on Room 101. Welcome back to Room 101. I am joined by Elizabeth Kucinich, wife of presidential hopeful Dennis Kucinich. Well, now seems to be enough time to talk about how you met Dennis and, are now calling Cleveland, Ohio your home.
We met in his office. It was my second week in America, and I'd never heard of him, but I had a meeting with him and my boss on monetary policy. It was an 8-minute meeting, and afterwards he handed me some legislation on a cabinet-level Department of Peace and Nonviolence, as he knew my background in international conflict analysis. And a couple of weeks later, I forwarded him a message from somebody in India who had seen the legislation and loved it and wanted to comment on it. And I forwarded it to Dennis. Instead of reading the attachment, he read my automatic signature, which was, "Knowing love, I shall allow all things to come and go, to be as supple as the wind and take everything that comes with great courage. My heart is as open as the sky. Life is right in any case." And to be honest, that's really the message I wanted him to see, because I just knew I'd met my husband the first time I met him in his office, and I'd been thinking about him ever since. The amazing thing was that after the first meeting that we had in his office, he evidently went on his phone and went down to the floor of the House of Representatives and phoned his friend, actress Mimi Kennedy, and said, I met my wife. And he spoke to 2 members of Congress and said the same thing, that he'd met the woman he's going to marry. And that was after the first meeting, so we both had the same feeling. And the day that I sent him the first email, he was sitting at his computer, evidently, as his story goes, saying, please, if you are my wife or if there's anything between us, please send me a message. And at that point, my email went into his mailbox. So it's just, he just opened up on his philosophy in life, nothing to do with monetary policy, but also nothing to do with romance. And it was very, very proper, beautiful emails. And we found out that in a week or so's time, we were both going to be in New Mexico. And so we met up. It was just incredible because we spent the whole of the evening that we were together talking. We talked all the way through till about 6 in the morning.
Wow.
Met up again for breakfast, and he took me to visit one of the friend that he'd been in town for, which was his best friend Shirley MacLaine. Shirley and my boss Dennis and I talked about monetary policy through the lunchtime, and she was very interested in that. Invited us back to her house, and that gave Dennis and I more time to talk to each other. And we just decided to get married. And it was just an absolutely incredible experience being in the mountains and doing that. And I just haven't looked back.
That's Guinness Book stuff. Second meeting, that's when you get engaged. Well, it seems, incredible. You're decades apart, you were oceans apart, and yet there's some kind of synchronicity that...
it's like our lives have just completely come together and moved off. It's incredible.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Sarah Backhouse. You have been watching Room 101 with Elizabeth Kucinich. We'll be back next time for more on Room 101.
Hey, Backhouse.
Yeah.
What does fembot mean to you?
Fembot.
Yeah.
Well, it's the portmanteaus of female robot. And I also think there's a Canadian indie rock band by the same name. Why? Why do you ask?
Because you're British.
So... Right. Oh, by the way, can you just plug me in? Phone's almost dead.
Oh, yeah, no problem.